Well, welcome to, believe it or not, episode 11 of Octavia Tried to Tell Its Parable for Today's Pandemic. I'm Tananarive Due. My co-host is the Reverend Dr. Monica A. Coleman. I just love saying that. And I'm so excited that we're having a guest join us, journalist and author, Lynell George, who has a beautiful new book about Octavia. Oops. Lynell left the room. Well, she'll be back. A Handful of Earth, A Handful of Sky, The World of Octavia E. Butler. Just a beautiful, beautiful volume. You will not be able to wait to get your hands on it. It's in hardcover as well. It should be soon to be out on audio. And she's going to discuss that with us, her journey and writing it and all that good stuff. So thank you for being here.
Great. We're going to give great Lynell a chance to come back.
Something I just got checked out.
It happens. That's what happens. That's technology is here to bedevil us.
So this gives us a chance to open up.
Okay.
Totally on. I'm so sorry. And I
don't know
some introductions because some people are new and joining us, which I love. If you're on social media, oops, there we go. If you're on social media, please use the hashtag Octavia Tried.
Okay, it's not letting me back in.
Oh, you're in. We see.
Oh, you're in. We see.
You can see me?
Yes.
Really? Okay.
So,
I better watch myself then.
If you see us, you can find us on Twitter and on Instagram using the hashtag Octavia Tried. There's usually a wonderful parallel conversation happening there. So feel free to use hashtag Octavia Tried as you're enjoying today. I get to introduce Tananarive. This is always where I'm trying to figure out where to put us on the screen.
Oh, right. So we can see the panels.
Right.
I'll just make it up as I go if I run out of it.
Really, that's what we're going to have to do until I can remember how to do this. And I did a run through. Can you believe it? Tananarive. Give me 1 second so I can.
We'll do the first half of the introductions.
Basically. Work with us. All right, yeah. Well, here we go. Tananarive Due is an award-winning author who teaches Black horror and Afrofuturism at UCLA. She's an executive producer on Shudder's groundbreaking documentary, Horror Noir, A History of Black Horror. A leading voice in Black speculative fiction for more than 20 years, Due has won an American Book Award, an NAACP Image Award, and a British Fantasy Award, and her writing has been included in Best of the Year anthologies.
That's enough.
Blooming Blood, I think, is my favorite one, the number 2 of your African Immortal series. So that's how we'll talk about all your books, by talking about my favorite.
Oh, that's fine. And thank you so much. And with me is, as I said, the Reverend Dr. Monica A. Coleman is a professor of Africana Studies at the University of Delaware. She's also an ordained elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, an initiate of traditional Yoruba religion. She works at the intersection of faith, culture, and social justice. She's the author or editor of 6 books and several articles and book chapters that focus on the role of faith and addressing critical social and philosophical issues. Her book, Making a Way Out of No Way, A Womanist Theology, another great title, is required reading at colleges and universities around the country. And she also has a fantastic memoir, Bipolar Faith, A Black Woman's Journey. Lynell George is a journalist and essayist. She's the author of 3 books of nonfiction, No Crystal Stare, African Americans at the City of Angels, and After Image, Los Angeles, Outside the Frame, and her latest, A Handful of Earth, A Handful of Sky, The World of Octavia E. Butler. Former staff writer for both the Los Angeles Times and LA Weekly, she covers social issues, human behavior, visual arts, music, and literature. She taught journalism at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. In 2013, was named a USC Annenberg Getty Arts Journalism Fellow, and in 2017 received the Huntington Library's Alan Jutzi Fellowship for her studies of California writer Octavia E. Butler, the fruits of which we get to enjoy in this book. Her commentary has also been featured in numerous news and feature outlets, including Boom, a Journal of California, Smithsonian, Alta, a Journal of Alta California, Vibe, Chicago Tribune, the Washington Post, and Essence, and Ms. Her liner notes for Otis Redding Live at the Whiskey A Go-Go earned a 2018 Grammy Award. Wait a minute. You won a Grammy Award for liner notes? That is amazing.
For Otis.
Grammy winner? This is our first Grammy winner on the webinar.
The first of many, let's say. No. Send us all your Grammy winner friends.
Yes.
And there's another paragraph there about how.
Oh, I don't see it yet.
Right. We'll talk about the book. Well, this is just a reminder as we're getting it together. Use the hashtag Octavia Tried. And I hope you're having as much fun as we are having right now. We're having a good time and we're looking forward to this lively conversation.
Yes. And don't we need this? I mean, we need some smiles. We need some laughter. I did my walk yesterday and I had music playing. It was more like that John Travolta walk at the beginning of Saturday Night Fever. I was like boogie walking. And I realized how much more fun that was. Like to dance, even just dance walking is so much better than not dancing every day. So we have to really struggle to find and hold on to our joy during this period, which is why this book, A Handful of Earth, A Handful of Sky, is so right on time. It's just right on time to help us connect not only with the work of Octavia, but the spirit of creativity, no matter how we're creative in our lives, in our art, in our work. Just to connect to that is so important, especially in times of stress is not even the word.
Right.
You know, I just want to say my father is 86 years old, John Due, civil rights attorney, and he has always been the rock of the family, whether it was the Dylan Roof shooting, no matter what, Trump's election, he was the one you call up and he would have a laugh and a philosophical outlook that helps you just realize, okay, this too shall pass. But he shed tears on January 6th. Wow. I just learned this yesterday when he watched this insurrection happening at the Capitol. And I know he's recovered, but I just think of how many others were not only sharing tears. I'm convinced some people were having heart attacks, you know, sort of this hidden cost of stress of watching these institutions like torn apart like paper. You know, in a way, like even this close to the inauguration. So we need this. We need this today, everybody. We need to hug and smile and celebrate each other and Octavia. So I'm so happy we have this space.
And you know,
celebrate Octavia's resilience.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Lynell.
I was just going to say, and celebrate Octavia's resilience. You know, we can tap into that.
Yes. Oh my goodness, that's a perfect topic. Is resilience, you know. I don't know if you wanted to jump in with an introduction or context yourself, Monica, before we jump into questions, but I have so many too.
I know, right?
About this book and
I mean, we talked so much about creativity in the webinars and in our workshops and about how, you know, it's partaking of the creativity of others is sustaining for us in this season and how we are tapping into our own creativity. And I am really excited to hear from you about some of the ways in which Octavia really, you know, and when we started this because we're like, Octavia is this model for us, right? And we were really thinking about her work more than her life. But I think her life really does as well. And so we would love to hear from you about how she was creative in what felt like pretty tough conditions.
Yes, yes. She absolutely... The thing that really I think about a lot, having been in the archive, and I guess it's sort of what has stayed with me, is that she didn't focus on what she didn't have. She focused on what she had. And even though it was modest, even though it may not have been as much in the beginning as she wanted, and she kept thinking, I'm going to get there, she didn't let that stop her from trying to create. So she didn't need the fancy leather-bound notebook. She didn't need, you know, the top of the line typewriter. She didn't need to go to a fancy seminar. She had her library card. She had her little 69-cent Mead notebook. She had, you know, she had her daily walk. She walked a lot. Tananarive Due talking about walking. She walked a lot and she absorbed and walked a lot in her neighborhood. She didn't get on a plane, necessarily to go some fancy place, especially when she was starting out. She didn't have that kind of money. She went to the library to do her research. And I was just taken with these items she had, that she used, modest items, to create this miraculous life.
Ooh, so beautifully put. Just wonderful. Now, before the webinar, you spoke a little bit about the fact that you did get the chance to meet Octavia in person before she passed away. Could you tell us what that was like, and then sort of segue into why, after she passed, you were just so passionate about her and her work that you wanted to write this book and begin researching this book?
Yeah, thank you. I was at the Black to the Future conference in Seattle, and Tananarive was there on a panel with Octavia, and I was there on assignment as a reporter, and was for the calendar section in the LA Times. And I pitched this story, not knowing exactly what it was going to be, but I was really intrigued by the event and that she was going to be giving the keynote. And I'd seen her, at readings at Esalen and at the now long departed and wonderful Midnight Special bookstore. And I'd go and sit then, and it was before I was a journalist. We'd go with my mom to these readings to see her. And so this was the first time I was in a room with her in a professional way. And I remember after she gave her beautiful keynote, which was really about community, she was encouraging all of us to connect, during these days that we were going to be together, and get phone numbers and, make a point to create community, a community that she didn't necessarily have always, especially in the beginning. And I remember going up to try to talk to her, and there was a long line. And if we had smartphones then, I'm sure people have been trying to take selfies with her and everything, but it had that kind of energy. And by the time I got to her, I could see she was very overwhelmed by the crowd. So I didn't want to be like, can I bring you over, just ask you a couple of questions? I just thought, I'm going to wait, because I kind of felt like she needed to have her space.
Mm-hmm.
But I asked her, would I be able to come back to LA, would she be coming back down to Los Angeles so I could interview her? And she said, yes, we will have our interview. And of course, 2 years later, she passed away. And that really stayed with me, that, we didn't have our chance to talk. Fast forward to 2016, I have coffee with Julia Meltzer, who heads a arts nonprofit in Los Angeles called Clock Shop. And she was putting together this year-long look and celebration of Butler and her life and her work. And she asked me, would you like to do a piece? And I said, sure. You do work in the archive? Sure. But I didn't know what it was going to be. And she said, could you do something like a posthumous interview? And I thought, that's interesting. I don't know what that'll look like, but I will try. And in that process of putting together that piece, which I thought it was going to be just me 2 months in the archive, in and out, write a piece. And what I ended up doing was I created a Q&A, but it was with Octavia asking questions, which she answered herself based on the journals and diaries and drafts in her archive, because she spent a lot of time while she was writing, thinking about, of course, all kinds of things. So the marginalia gives us a sense of part of her life too. And that's where a lot of the questions would, surface. So I turn the piece in, move on, but she's still talking to me in my ear. And, and I realized, like, I guess I'm not done. And what is it I want to do next? And that's when it hit me, this part about the self-creation part. This was so key. And it was a theme of the Q&A about, she didn't have a map. She didn't have a role model, but she knew she wanted to be a writer. And back to those things we were talking about, those humble items she had, those were the things that really struck me. And I thought, but how do I organize something around this? And what should it be? What should it look like? And then I landed on a quote of hers about science fiction, because she was always asked, well, what is science fiction for Black people? What good is it for Black people? And what is science fiction? And she said, it's a handful of earth, a handful of sky, and everything around and in between. And that's when it hit. It's a recipe, as her life is. And she grounded it. So that's what got me started on this. I thought, okay, this is what I'm going to do. How do we create not just a writer's life, but how do you create a life, a creative life, a life that nobody else understands? How do you bolster yourself? How do you take care and protect your heart? How do you keep going when people don't really understand what it is you're trying to do? And she did that. And that's stayed with me.
Yeah, I'm so moved by that, right? Because we talk so often about the importance of having models and seeing people ahead of you. And yet so many of us are still firsts, right? In whatever
exactly
to do, or first in our field. And so we have to kind of create that path ourselves. Yes. And we see how wonderfully she did it. And so it's great to have her as a model, right? And it comes to mind the word is like frontier, right? It's just really on that frontier. And so I wanted to ask you, and some of this is because of some of the beautiful images that are in the book. And, you're in LA, so is Tananarive. I was in LA. And I'd love for you to talk a bit about the context of Southern California and how that's affected her, especially since, it's such we talked about being in a pandemic and how pandemic, LA County is right now.
Yes. Oh my goodness, yes.
1 in 3 in LA County, not city, LA County is supposed to be infected with COVID.
Right. 1 in 3.
A lot.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I would just, the ICU beds are filled. We know it's, high pandemic time there right now. Yeah. And so I'd love to hear from you a bit about how California has shapes her and how context shapes us.
Yes. She really, because she was a walker, she never drove, she took the bus. I think that connected her to place in a way that a lot of Angelenos, especially people who have access to talking about place, they forget. And, we're not all in cars. We're not, she said she didn't want to learn how to drive because she didn't trust herself behind the wheel of a car. And to me, that's to our benefit, because it's so clear from her notes, and she used to have these tiny notebooks that she called walk thoughts, or she carried around with her. And so that's how we see the environment when we look at something like Parable of the Sower in particular, where she was looking at climate change, so she would say, this is blooming this year early, or this is not blooming at all. Or, she would, down to the details of like how many oranges might be on a tree, or how did the persimmons look sick? Did the leaves look sick? So she was notating, like taking notes about her environs. And that was really important to her. I also feel like the fact that she was born and lived in Pasadena in her early life, being so close to JPL and NASA, and, like this idea of science right there, but also films. And she as a little kid, she watched B movies and television shows, in the middle of the day, and got kind of hooked into that. And that shaped her. And of course, the famous story about, her as a little kid watching Devil Girl from Mars, this B movie, and realizing, she wasn't 12 yet, so thinking, I can do a better job. I can write something better than that. So this movie, inspires her to write new realities, new worlds. And she'd already been writing fantasies and reading science fiction, but this is the thing, this movie, product of, Southern California kind of pushes her. So so you've got environment, you've got NASA and JPL, and you've got like the film industry all kind of woven in together.
This is a somewhat broad question, and it's informed by some news that has been going around Twitter. With a new administration coming in, there are certain people in my feed who are being picked for administrative jobs. One of them is Alondra Nelson, Dr. Alondra Nelson, one of the movers behind the Afrofuturism movement, with a listserv early in the movement, with concerns not just about the fiction, but about the digital divide. So she's a futurist, she's a thinker. So I was so excited to hear that she's just been appointed, let me get it right. She's joining the Biden-Harris administration's Office of Science and Technology Policy as Deputy Director for Science and Society.
Oh, wow.
Right? So it's the kind of title that is about something. It's not just science in isolation, but it's the use of science and technology and how it relates to society and all the things she's been doing, but within an administration. And I know Octavia was a very humble person on the one hand, but on the other hand, she truly, I think, believed that her writing could, or at least she hoped her writing could, make a difference in the way we looked at science and the way we looked at society. So it's that relationship between Afrofuturism as a concept and shaping change as a reality. Right. And as you were going through her voluminous papers, because I saw the display at the Huntington, which is just a fraction of what's there, but there is so much, there are drawings and photographs and papers. What jumped out to you in terms of her utter commitment to humanity, as much as we disappointed her?
I know. That's what I keep thinking. We She tried to tell us.
She tried. She tried so hard.
It's like she did, and we didn't listen.
We did not listen. I think the thing is like there's so much, with all the darkness in many of her works, there's always hope. And I don't mean fragile, sort of like Pollyanna hope. It shows up in ways of, like, in nature in particular, like things keep blooming, things keep moving, people have children, people get together. And I think this idea of humanity, she was frustrated by it. And you see it especially in these journals that she would do. She had all these different kinds of journals working, like notebooks. And she called herself a news junkie. And she was obsessed with the headlines and the news, radio news, newspaper news, that newspapers show up on her doorstep. And it was that keeping tabs on what we were doing to the planet, what we were doing to one another, that affected her. I mean, it affected her body. And sometimes when she was working on novels, she would put herself on a program, it's like a news diet almost, like I can't consume all of this news because it is now interfering with the worlds I'm creating or I'm attempting to create. And I can't change it right now because I'm in the middle of something. So some morning she was like, or some week, she goes, okay, no NPR. I will listen to classical music. And but in the journals, when she had time, she did a lot of talking back to political leaders, letter writing. She would be frustrated about policy, lots of notes, to and about, different presidents, Ronald Reagan, Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton. But these are not necessarily things that went out, to them. But these were her ways of working out certain, news in the news cycle, certain policies, things that she felt that people were overlooking. But she started this, which was so amazing. She started this as a kid. When Martin Luther King was assassinated, there's a little notation in her journal about that too, and where she starts by calling him Marty. Now Marty. I'm so sorry, but there's something about. We were talking about her modesty, and I was thinking that too. And she was, and you spent more time with her than I, had. But you can see it in the journals as well. But she was bold on the page. Mm. She was bold and she was like working things out on the page.
The way you articulate her is so beautiful. I'm just sort of sitting here
Oh.
basking in it. So, yeah, she was bold on the page, modest, humble, shy. You know,
Yeah.
Harlan Ellison, the late Harlan Ellison, who actually sponsored her to her first Clarion, would recall how she would cover her mouth and hide almost behind her mouth when she spoke. And she had to overcome all that to become the public speaker and public person. So when you talk about how exhausted she probably was after, you know, because it takes energy. And I know, and you know, too, that no matter how social you are, when you're out in the public, even in front of a screen, it leaches a little bit of energy. It gives sometimes, but it also leaches. So you have to measure it. And for someone who is not super social, who lives alone, who lives in her head, bless you for giving her that space. A lot of reporters, and believe me, I know I was a reporter, and I was more like you. I would have been like, no, I don't want to bother her. So you have this regret on the one hand, but you can never regret giving someone grace and giving someone space.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I feel, thank you, because I feel like this was the gift of time that I would never have gotten as a reporter. Because, you know, even though as you know, we all talk about access, you know, like, oh, the story's going to be great but we have to have good access, like not a telephone call, not email exchange. You know, can I spend time with that person? An hour, 2 hours, 2 weeks, a month, a year, you know, kind of going back and forth. This was so different because even if I had become close to her, as close as a reporter can, and she had revealed things she hadn't spoken about ever, it still would not be like what this was. This was like occupying not just their head, but their arm. It's like I was like looking over her shoulder. I was in her arm as her hand moved across the page. I mean, you're with her daily thoughts and so many of those thoughts and the way they come in and out. And that's so different from what somebody decides to like filter in and, you know, out of a conversation with you, even an intimate conversation with you.
Well, this actually leads to one of the questions someone submitted earlier, which was, as you're going through her archive, like kind of over her shoulder, her arm, what surprised you the most? Like, what did you encounter that was like, oh, wow, you know, like I would not have known or guessed this?
The thing that keeps coming up because is like, it's this, and, you know, I think we see all these photos of her and she looks so serious and sober expression, and you know that she had a wicked sense of humor. She was really funny, and you see that in the archive, in the pages of her calendars in particular. She would buy these, like, you know, calendars that had little sayings, you know, from famous people every day, and sometimes she would just argue with them, you know, like it's like let me just dissect this, let me take this apart and argue with these aphorisms on the page. And also these one-liners that were just quick and sharp and wry, and that part of her that really sort of, and it's not so much silly, but this lightness, you know, like that surprised me. That was one thing. And the other thing that really, really, again, back to what, you know, we talked about earlier about what we take with us, how she bent time in her own physical life in her day. Like, I do not know how she found the time she did to do all the things she did with the writing, you know? So, so she'd get up at 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning and start writing, and it would write till the sun came up, then would shower, maybe then go on a walk or not, maybe have to go immediately to work and then to school, and then come home and then write some more and then go to bed and start again. So, and she had put herself on this schedule, you know, like, and she learned before we were saying things like prioritize yourself. She was living that. She was, you know, prioritizing her dream. And that really, really stuck with me too. It's like, I had no idea. I guess, you know, as a writer, you know, too, it's like, I feel like we get tired. It's hard. It's that living in our head part it's like, oh, you have to rest, you know, it's exhausting, you know, and it is, but she did all of it. And it's, this isn't to say it was easy. And some days weren't hard, and some days she didn't always have, you know, something to show for it. Some days all the pages went into the trash, but she got up again and she did it. And this idea of bending time and figuring out ways to work so that she could pay her bills, which was hard. But she kept pushing it forward. And that's the thing that really also like, surprised me as well. It was like how much she did with very little. Yeah.
Would this have been around the period leading up to when she was writing Kindred? Because she described Dana's life.
Exactly.
Dana's life sounds a lot like that life, actually.
That's what it was, exactly. And the jobs that Dana has, and she talks about, all of those were Octavia's jobs.
Right. As you were speaking about her struggles, as much as I wish Octavia had lived to see, well, some parts of now. I mean, some parts of now are not that great to like, hey. But she would have been thrilled to see the rise of Afrofuturism, the rise of so many other artists. I know, you know, that it felt like such a fragile family, and now it's a flourishing family. But at the same time, I'm so grateful that she did live to receive the MacArthur.
Me too. I think that
foundation grant.
Yeah, I think that too, because that confirmed so much. And the interesting thing about that, back to the fragile community, which I love, that's, you know, and back to this idea about what surprised me also for all that time, she spent so much time writing to young writers who, you know, you could tell even from the letter that came in, you know, before, you know, that they didn't expect an answer. She sat down and wrote. She wrote them because she didn't have that. She didn't have that. And so by the time she gets to the MacArthur, you know, like a lot of the journals are about, you know, her struggle and her frustration and working through things that were painful or puzzles and she was curious about. So I'm waiting at the point, I'm looking through the journals that I find the newspaper day when she wins. And I'm like, okay, I'm looking for the journals that all have. There's nothing in there like, yay me. Now, then I had to stop and think, would I write in my journal, yay me, that I won the MacArthur that day? I don't know. It really did make me kind of like turn the mirror.
I'll let you know.
Listen,
my journal's going to be like, woohoo.
Big letters, a string of exclamation points. Okay.
Yes.
Back to the humble, modest Octavia.
You really, there's nothing like
unless it's in a box that's still sealed.
Wow.
I did not find. Now, what I do find, what is there, and this is beautiful, and I may tear up. Two things. One, you see all of the paperwork. She saved everything. So, like all the brochures, you know, about what it was, and the letter of, you know, telling her, and there's like insurance, health insurance you get, and all. So she saved all of this stuff, and then there's a big packet of notes and cards from people in her life who had her come in and speak, you know, so professors, you know, I know, you know, letters. And the most touching letter came from the people that worked in her post office, where her post office box was, and they sent her a letter congratulating her. So it was almost like, this is enough. And you could see like all these different places in her life where she, as shy as she was, she had made enough of a, you know, connection and imprint that people wanted to reach out and like, you know, Team Octavia, yes. You know, exclamation points, you know. So that was incredibly moving to see that.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a great experience to have.
Yeah.
What Octavia described herself sometimes as a pessimist, or at least when people described her as a pessimist to her face, she did not try to deny it.
No.
What do you think would surprise her the least about our current moment in history? And is there anything you think would have surprised her about our current moment in history?
Wow.
I know that's a tough one.
That is a tough one because I can only go, and I try to be careful, and I think that is that reporter in me too. I try to be careful about, like, yeah, there's a fiction writer in me too. So I have to say, you go sit over there. You know, there's the tiny little therapist in me that is this, like, you go over there. But from what I think the thing that wouldn't have surprised her is she knew we were capable, not so much of, she knew that people are selfish, people are gullible, people like that became really like that. You see that time and again, you know, in the journal writing about news events. You see it in the novels. But I think the thing that would have surprised her, that's a really good question. It's now making me want to go back through what I was working through. I think the thing that would have surprised her, I do think, as you were talking about this community growing, you know, I think she would have been really surprised and heartened and felt support by all the people that are behind her now and behind her words, because she did feel so isolated. She did feel like there's this one piece I photographed. This is, again, marginalia, where she talked about, if I say God has changed every day for 14 years, I'm paraphrasing, will anybody ever listen? And so you realize when you see something like that, like, you know, and this is probably a time where she wasn't getting published, or she wasn't getting the traction, because she went 5 years without being published between two publications. And I'm thinking, and she kept going. So I think the fact that there's this community around her and her work, and especially around the ideas around her work, it's a way, I think, that I would confirm things that she was wobbly on at times and worried about at times. So that, I know, would have surprised her.
I think that MacArthur gave her a glimpse of that. But, you know, I've been to Huntington, even just itself, and I think to myself, oh, Lord, she would never have even known how to picture this. Or the last thing I did before the pandemic, my last public outing, was the opera Parable of the Sower.
We were there.
Right.
What was the last one? Yeah.
And the whole time I was there, I was thinking, well, not only how bizarre it was that the opera had met the reality of the pandemic, but that this room full of people, like if she had been sitting there watching this performance, I think she just would have been floored.
Yeah, I absolutely think so. And this idea of her, of inspiration and community, that idea of community building and people pushing back and people coming up, because that's the whole thing, is like realizing that the structure doesn't work. The structure that, you know, are born into, it's not working. So let's figure out our own. Let's figure out a way to work within that structure and then push out of it. And I think, you know, people pushing back and, you know, speaking truth to power and all of that would have also heartened her, like to see that, you know, see that kind of, that build and that crowd. That's what came up in that conversation, you know, with Toshi and Ayanna Jameson afterward, like this idea about, okay, how, you know, what do we build? How do we build it? So that was really important, you know, as well, you know.
So surreal under those circumstances.
Yeah, it was.
I'm wondering, and this is a question we've had, I think, in a couple places people have asked, what is your favorite work by Octavia? And did that change from before you were in her archives to after?
It's interesting. I think the book, it's always hard. One of my editors was giving me a hard time because she says, you won't pick one. And I said, yes, because there are many Octavias for many moods and many needs. And it, you know, so Kindred was the one that probably pulled me in, you know, I mean, that did pull me into her work. And because it dealt with history and the wound of slavery and violence of slavery and this idea, and I love this, and she goes where she's talking about the book and how important it was, history is a planet. Like, it's like, it's like people were saying, well, that's a science, telling her that it was a science fiction book, but it's just, no, it's not. There's no science in that book. There's no machine. There's no time machine. There's no this. No. But history can, but history can be a planet. And she goes, I think of, Kindred more as a fantasy. And it's a way to deal with problems from the past and think about the future. And so that book really, like, it just kind of like jolted my brain, as a writer, and then now now living through what we were living through, I think the parables of Christ are the one. I have one of my really closest friends is, her favorite book is Wild Seed. The book that I discovered while I was in their archive was Bloodchild. And I've been back and forth because it's essays and short fiction. And I love how she, at the end of each section, she talks back to the story and talks about how she felt about it or what she would do now. And that is a conversation as well. And that that was valuable as I was working through the archive, to like hear her more formal voice, about her work, about specific pieces. So it was a way to be led through as well. But yeah, so that's, and I have actually, I was just looking at them before we started. I have copies of my mother's copies of Dawn and Adulthood Rights, with her notes in there as well. So I can see things that she was thinking about, while she was reading Octavia. And that's been a blessing too.
Mm-hmm. I have a book that Octavia signed to my mother that I trot out a photo of from time to time, something like Here's to a Better Future, which really resonated to me because Octavia Butler is the futurist and my mother is a civil rights activist. And that is the thing about Afrofuturism, and that relationship between the past, present, and future all on one plane, that we have to be able to dream it and believe it to make it happen. And we can only do that based on understanding where we've come from. So there's really no step toward the future that doesn't involve the present or the past.
Exactly.
And I think she really understood that.
Yeah.
Did you get a sense, sometimes it's out of critique that as artists, we reach in and create some of our best work. Like I just saw one night in Miami where Sam Cooke was sort of inspired to create a song about change based on criticism from Malcolm X. And I think Octavia's version of that story, what are you doing for the struggle, sister?
Right.
Is that prior to Kindred, there were, come on, there were not any Black science fiction writers running around where people, or at least for the most part, Samuel R. Delany had done some, but Octavia didn't seem to be writing about the struggle, and they would criticize her. And her answer to that was Kindred, right? So
exactly, I'll show you.
Which is really one of the books that most people know. It's like the first Octavia novel. Did you find anything about that thinking in the archives, like feeling misunderstood by her own?
Yes, absolutely. And it would come up in the journals a lot, and sometimes in notes for essays she was thinking about writing, but definitely in the journals or in interviews, I will see a reporter had sent her questions and she would be working out things. And she talks a lot about that. So what are you doing? Or the other tipping point for that story was people saying, well, if I was born back then, I would have acted, I would have done all these different things. And like, you don't know what you would have done, And so in this idea about back to the isolation is like, she absorbed it, and her way of working through it, she joined, well, she was at Cal State LA briefly. She was part of the Afro-American Club, and she did study group and that sort of thing as a way, I think, to kind of go deeper, because this wasn't stuff she was getting in school growing up in the public school system in Pasadena, so she didn't, everything she had to look for everything in libraries and in newspapers and in conversation and trying to put together a community. So there is definitely evidence in there, but there's this quote, you probably have, I know you've seen it, Tananarive, because it pops up in different versions, but she goes, yeah, I realized I was writing these books where, in stories that were like, were just like the ones I was reading, where you've got these 35-year-old white men who smoke and drink too much. Those were my characters too, because I didn't have a model. I didn't have a model until she started answering and asking and answering questions, based on being put on the spot and being made to feel uncomfortable. And that's what kind of pushed her further.
Wow. Just such an intimate relationship you've gained with her through that experience with the archive.
Yeah.
I'd love to ask about we read Octavia. Who did she read? Right? Who were her favorite writers or poets, or what writers inspired her?
I actually pulled something out from this interview that she did, a Q&A, and because I love this. These are from my actual notes. So her early influences, she talks about, Bambi and Big Red and the Black Stallion. She was really into horse stories as a little girl and, fantasies. But she says, later I read science fiction indiscriminately. I particularly liked writers who created interesting and believable characters, but I read whoever I found at the library or in magazines that I bought at the supermarket. My first science fiction magazines were Amazing, Fantastic, Galaxy, Analog, and the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction. Some of the authors I especially liked when I was in my early teens were Theodore Sturgeon, Eric Frank, Russell, Ray Bradbury, Robert Heinlein, Marion Zimmer Bradley. Later I discovered Marion Zimmer Bradley, Harlan Ellison, and Arthur C. Clarke. So that's science fiction. And she basically would say, she goes, there was a period where she felt she was reading too much science fiction. And so she had to kind of pull herself back. So she read fantasy. And she read horror. She read Stephen King. She read, she would do these things where she would find a book on the bestseller list and read it and then outline it to figure out what was its secret. Why was it a bestseller? So she would make these very, very detailed notes. But she also read Toni Morrison, Toni Cade Bambara. The other person who I read, and I started to again, back to the marginalia. So I could tell either she was listening to, sometimes she would scroll things in the margins because you could see she saw somebody on television or she heard somebody on the radio. And one was the poet Cornelius Eady. And she written down, so I went and found the books of his, and some of them are out of print, now, which is sad. But the things, and then she would type out poems. So there's some poems of people, and I think one of his is one of the ones that she typed out, and she probably tacked it to the wall or something. But yeah, so she took influence from all genres.
It's so interesting you mentioned the poetry too, because the Earthseed parables are so much like poetry, some might argue they are. Mm-hmm. And I was sitting next to a childhood friend of Octavia's at that parable of the Sower opera, and she remembered, and her name has slipped my mind.
Donna?
Yeah, Donna, yes.
Yeah, of course you know.
And she said when Octavia was writing those Earthseed parables, she would kind of show Donna her progress as she was going, and Donna was like, okay, these are all right, these are good, but poetry's my thing, now watch out.
You gotta guard your boundaries. Your territory. It's funny. I was looking at this also on here. She talks about Earthseed because I put Earthseed together by asking myself questions and coming up with an answer For instance, I asked what was the most powerful force I could think of. What one thing could we not stop no matter how hard we tried? The answer I came up with after some thought was change.
And isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
And I'm going to just be a nerd here for a second, because that's like a really great way in which we do theology as a theologian. The theological method is to ask questions. It's like saying that the world gives you questions and you answer them with your religious beliefs, right? And that just delights me as like Octavia the theologian.
That's right.
Exactly. Like, yes, we have names for this.
Absolutely.
And that's the way that, you know, a lot of us come to what we believe, right? Is like, how are we answering the big questions?
Yes, exactly.
And certainly Octavia's work helped answer those big questions for us. And I'm illuminated even more than before, so much more than before, after talking to you, Lynell, about her process. And I knew she was an observer, but her levels of observation are far deeper than I even imagined. And thank you so much for I won't call it the labor, because it was a joy, I know, for you, but thank you for creating this document, this time capsule for us.
Well, really, thank you so much for having me. As I was mentioning before, and not to make you blush or anything too hard, but talking about her big heart, you know, I kept seeing Tananarive's name in Octavia's archive, either notes she had started out to you, or maybe her practice note to send you a card to congratulate. She was working on a blurb, and I just thought, you know, here are the connections. And this is how she's still here. This is how she's still here. You know, we can reach out, and I can tell you that about that, and I can tell other friends. You know, my friend Professor Richard Yarborough at UCLA. You know, he would often have her in class, and he would offer to drive her from, you know, Pasadena out to UCLA and back if she didn't drive. But we are community, and that's what being in that archive really, really told me. You know, really like exhibited, you know, to me in a really strong way. And it continues, and this is how she lives through us.
Absolutely. Well, if you haven't yet, everyone who's listening, be sure to get your copy of A Handful of Earth, A Handful of Sky, The World of Octavia E. Butler, and also check out...
Hold on. I think I got fancy here.
The website, lynellgeorge.com.
There, can you see it? I hope you all who are here can see it in chat. You can just hit a button and you're right to...
Oh, that's very handy, Monica.
There we go. I think it
so, and thank you to all of you for being here. There are a lot of places you can be.
Thank you, everybody.
On a Saturday afternoon. Thank you for coming. Let's tell you, we want to tell you a little bit about our Shaping Change workshop that Monica and I also run. That's next Saturday, which is it's a different group. It's a smaller group, more intimate. You get to be up on the screen too. We talk and visit with each other in a slightly different way. And we don't do it with a guest. It's just us. But it's learning 7 steps of Octavia's method of shaping change as interpreted by us, not as written in stone by Octavia. Ongoing discussion of Octavia Butler's work and influence, the Shaping Change e-journal, which just helps you keep your thoughts and goals in line, modeling some of the process that Octavia used herself to keep herself on track and in line. Mm-hmm. Interaction with us in a sort of different, more personal way, a social media group, and a sign-up bonus, which is an interview that my husband, Stephen Barnes, and I conducted with Octavia when I got to hear a lot of laughter, which, you know, I didn't see her humor as much now, but she definitely was laughing a lot when Steve was there. And it was nice to see that sort of almost girlish side of her come out when she laughed. So check it out, www.octaviawebinar.com. There's a small monthly fee to participate in that group, but hopefully you'll check it out.
Yeah, and you can just hit the button over there too. And the last thing, this is so small, but we're very excited that we are now working on an app for the Octavia Tried to Tell Us
Series.
our series, so that
and it's not small, it's huge. It's huge. We got a grant to do it, and we're yeah.
And so we need an app designer. So we're looking
yeah, we do.
one. But if you are one, if you know one, we'll also send an email out, or everyone here should know how to reach us by email one way or the other, because you've got an email from us, and so, or you will very soon. And so if you know of one, feel free to let us know. But this is a way that they can share their information with us, and we can get to them. We particularly would love a designer who's already familiar with Octavia's work, so that, there's some love in it too.
Absolutely. So that way we can, like people ask here, where can I find the replays? When you have the app, all that will be right at your fingertips. So, and the replays are on YouTube. There's an Octavia Tried to Tell Us. Really, if you just say Octavia Tried to Tell Us on YouTube, it'll pop up, but there's a whole playlist there. But the app will help us do it in an even more organized way, so that you, no matter where you are, pick up your phone, boop, I want to listen to that Lynell George interview again, because I need some inspiration today. So that's what we're working on.
Right. It all have one home, because sometimes you stumble on us on social media and sometimes you don't. So
yes. We're trying to eliminate that maybe not factor. But thank you all for being here. Thank you, Lynell, so much for being here and for this beautiful, beautiful work that you've created and the stories you have shared. And I know Octavia would love this. So bless you.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. And thank you all for joining us today. And again, thank you both for having me and presenting the book. And yeah, it's not even just, I just feel like it's not even her memory. It's like, we're just unleashing more of her,
Bringing her back to life. Let's just call it like that. Bringing her back to life on one level. So she can walk with us.
It's like getting notes from her life on how we can do this, right?
Yes.
Exactly. And that we don't need a lot. That's what I think really got. Like, we don't need, we love the retreats and everything, but a library card and a notebook.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She launched herself. Yep. She launched herself. Yeah.
And you all can too. So everyone, big hug to everybody, especially if you're going through hardship during this period. Hopefully this, whatever season you're in, will pass. And sending love.
Sending love. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.